Why ignoring your shadow leads to self-destruction. Carl Jung's warning. Carl Jung discovered something terrifying about human nature. The parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge don't disappear. They don't fade away quietly. They grow stronger in the darkness, more powerful, more destructive, until they eventually destroy us from within. Jung called this rejected part of ourselves the shadow. It contains everything we've deemed unacceptable about our personality: our anger, our selfishness, our sexuality, our aggression, our weakness, our shame, everything we've learned to hide from others and from ourselves. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply unconscious. But when we ignore it, deny it, or try to suppress it completely, it becomes our enemy. It sabotages our relationships, destroys our success, and turns us into the very thing we're trying not to be. Jung's warning is clear. You can't destroy your shadow. You can only integrate it or be destroyed by it. There is no third option. This isn't mystical nonsense or abstract philosophy. It's practical psychology with real consequences. People who ignore their shadows develop addictions, sabotage their careers, destroy their relationships, and sometimes hurt themselves or others in explosive, seemingly unexplainable ways. Understanding Jung's warning about the shadow could be the most important psychological knowledge you ever gain. Because your shadow is operating right now, whether you acknowledge it or not. What is the shadow? The shadow forms during childhood as we learn what's acceptable and what's not. Parents, teachers, society all send clear messages about which traits are good and which are bad. When a child shows anger, they might be punished, so they learn to suppress anger. That anger doesn't disappear. It goes into the shadow. When a girl is told to be nice and accommodating, her natural assertiveness goes into the shadow. When a boy is told to be tough and strong, his vulnerability and tenderness go into the shadow. Layer by layer, experience by experience, we build up a collection of rejected traits, emotions, and impulses. This collection becomes the shadow. The shadow contains more than just negative traits. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The shadow doesn't just contain bad traits. It contains anything we've rejected, including positive qualities that didn't fit our family or culture's expectations. Common shadow contents: anger and aggression that was punished, sexual desires that were shamed, ambition that was called selfish, creativity that was called impractical, intelligence that made others uncomfortable, emotions that were labeled as weakness, power that was seen as threatening, playfulness that was called immature, vulnerability that was called weakness, success that created family jealousy. The shadow is autonomous. The most dangerous thing about the shadow is that it operates independently. It has its own goals, its own energy, its own agenda. When you ignore it, it doesn't ask permission to act. It acts through unconscious behaviors, slips of the tongue, accidental sabotage, unexplained moods, compulsive habits, addictions, and sudden explosions of emotion that seem to come from nowhere. People say things like, "I don't know what came over me," or "that's not like me." But it is like them. It's their shadow, finally getting its way. The process of self-destruction. Jung observed specific patterns in how ignored shadows lead to self-destruction. Understanding these patterns helps you recognize them in yourself before it's too late. Stage 1. Projection. The first stage of shadow-driven destruction is projection. When we can't acknowledge traits in ourselves, we see them everywhere in others. The person who has suppressed their own anger sees everyone else as aggressive and hostile. The person who has rejected their sexuality sees the world as over-sexualized and immoral. The person who has hidden their ambition criticizes others for being too driven or materialistic. Signs you're projecting your shadow. You have strong emotional reactions to certain traits in others. You notice the same problem in multiple people in your life. You're certain about others' motivations without real evidence. You feel morally superior to people who display certain traits. You're drawn to people who have qualities you claim to hate. Stage 2. Repression energy drain. Keeping the shadow suppressed requires enormous psychological energy. It's like holding a beach ball underwater. The bigger it gets, the more effort it requires. This energy drain manifests as chronic fatigue. You're exhausted for no clear physical reason. Lack of motivation. You can't find energy for things that used to excite you. Emotional numbness. You feel disconnected from your emotions, both positive and negative. Decision paralysis. You can't make choices because part of you wants one thing while your conscious mind wants another. Loss of authenticity. You feel like you're performing rather than being yourself. The energy you're using to suppress your shadow is energy you can't use for living, creating, or connecting with others. Stage 3. Shadow eruptions. Eventually, the pressure becomes too great. The shadow erupts in ways you can't control. These eruptions often seem completely out of character, shocking to both you and others. Common shadow eruptions. Rage explosions. Years of suppressed anger explode in disproportionate reactions to minor triggers. Sexual acting out. Suppressed sexuality emerges in compulsive or inappropriate sexual behavior. Self-sabotage. Just as you're about to succeed, you unconsciously destroy your own opportunities. Addiction. Substances or behaviors become ways to temporarily escape or express shadow content. Physical illness. The body expresses what the mind refuses to acknowledge. Relationship destruction. You push away people who get too close to seeing your shadow. These eruptions are the shadow demanding attention, forcing integration, or destroying your life in the process. Stage 4. The enantiodromia. Jung used the term enantiodromia to describe when something transforms into its opposite. This is the final stage of shadow-driven self-destruction. The morally righteous person is caught in a scandal. The peaceful person commits violence. The helper becomes helpless. The strong person collapses completely. The rational person has a breakdown. Examples of enantiodromia. The priest who preaches purity is caught in a sex scandal. The peaceful activist who becomes violent at protests. The successful executive who suddenly abandons everything. The devoted parent who suddenly abandons their family. The health fanatic who develops severe illness. This is an hypocrisy. It's the shadow finally taking over completely, forcing the conscious personality to experience what it has denied. Why integration fails. Common mistakes. Many people recognize they have shadow work to do, but they make critical mistakes that prevent real integration. Or worse, make the shadow even more dangerous. Mistake 1. Spiritual bypassing. Some people try to transcend their shadow through spiritual practices, meditation, prayer, positive thinking. They believe they can rise above their darkness. But the shadow can't be transcended. It can only be integrated. Spiritual practices that try to eliminate the shadow just create more sophisticated repression. Signs of spiritual bypassing. Using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with real psychological issues. Believing you're beyond negative emotions like anger or jealousy. Judging others for not being as evolved as you. Using meditation or prayer to escape rather than to integrate. Developing a spiritual ego that's actually the shadow in disguise. Mistake 2. Indulging the shadow. The opposite mistake is thinking shadow integration means acting out every impulse. If you're angry, punch someone. If you're sexual, sleep with everyone. If you're selfish, take whatever you want. This isn't integration. It's being controlled by the shadow. Real integration means acknowledging these impulses exist, understanding their origin, and choosing conscious responses rather than unconscious reactions. Signs of shadow indulgence. Justifying harmful behavior as being authentic. Refusing to take responsibility for how your actions affect others. Claiming you can't control yourself. That's just who you are. Using shadow work as an excuse for bad behavior. Becoming more selfish and destructive rather than more whole. Mistake 3. Intellectualizing without feeling. Some people learn everything about shadow work intellectually. They can talk about Jung's theories perfectly, but they never actually feel their shadow content, never integrate it emotionally. The shadow must be felt, not just understood. You have to actually experience the emotions you've suppressed, not just think about them. Signs of intellectualization. You can explain shadow theory, but don't recognize your own shadow. You analyze your emotions rather than feeling them. You use psychological terms to avoid actual emotional experience. You treat shadow work like an academic subject. You know what you should feel, but don't actually feel it. Mistake 4. Doing it alone. Shadow work is difficult and often impossible to do completely alone. We all have blind spots, parts of ourselves we literally cannot see without help. This is why therapy, trusted friends, or spiritual teachers are often necessary. They can see what we can't, reflect back what we're projecting, and provide safe space for shadow integration. Signs you need help. You keep having the same problems in relationships or career. People tell you things about yourself that you completely reject. You have strong emotional reactions you can't explain. You engage in compulsive behaviors you can't control. You feel stuck despite trying to change. The process of shadow integration. Real shadow integration isn't quick or easy, but it's possible, and it's the only path to becoming whole and preventing self-destruction. Step 1. Recognition. The first step is recognizing that you have a shadow, that there are parts of yourself you've rejected or denied. Recognition practices. Notice what you strongly dislike in others. That's often your projected shadow. Pay attention to out-of-character behaviors or impulses. Examine family messages about what was acceptable and what wasn't. Notice what emotions you have difficulty feeling or expressing. Look at patterns of self-sabotage or repeated relationship problems. Step 2. Acknowledgement. Once you recognize shadow content, you must acknowledge it. Admit that yes, you have anger, or selfishness, or sexual desires, or ambition, or weakness. This acknowledgement doesn't mean you're proud of these traits. It means you accept they exist. Acknowledgement statements. Yes, I do have anger, even though I've tried to be only peaceful. I do have selfish impulses, even though I try to be generous. I do feel competitive and envious sometimes. I do have aggressive thoughts, even if I never act on them. I am not as perfect as I've tried to appear. Step 3. Understanding. Once acknowledged, you need to understand your shadow. Where did these rejected parts come from? What purpose do they serve? What are they trying to tell you? Understanding questions. When did I learn this part of me was unacceptable? What happened when I showed this trait as a child? What need or desire is this shadow content trying to meet? How has suppressing this part of me affected my life? What would happen if I integrated this consciously? Step 4. Conscious expression. Integration means finding conscious, healthy ways to express shadow content, not suppressing it, not acting it out unconsciously, but expressing it consciously and appropriately. Conscious expression examples. Anger becomes healthy boundary setting and self-protection. Suppressed sexuality becomes conscious intimacy and pleasure. Hidden ambition becomes purposeful goal setting and achievement. Rejected vulnerability becomes authentic connection and depth. Denied playfulness becomes creativity and joy. Step 5. Ongoing vigilance. Shadow integration is never complete. New situations reveal new shadow content. Life changes bring new challenges. The shadow continues to form throughout life as we continue to reject parts of ourselves. Healthy people maintain ongoing awareness of their shadow. They notice when they're projecting, when they're suppressing, when shadow eruptions are brewing. Ongoing practices, regular self-reflection or journaling, therapy or counseling when needed, honest conversations with trusted friends, attention to dreams, which often reveal shadow content, willingness to receive feedback from others. The rewards of shadow integration. Jung promised that shadow integration leads to wholeness. And he was right. The rewards are profound and life-changing. Increased energy. When you stop using energy to suppress your shadow, that energy becomes available for living, creating, connecting, growing. People who have integrated their shadows report feeling more alive, more energetic, more present, because they're no longer fighting themselves constantly. Authentic relationships. When you accept your whole self, you can show up authentically in relationships. You don't need to hide, perform, or pretend. This authenticity attracts healthier relationships and deepens existing ones. People can finally see and love the real you, not just your carefully constructed persona. Creative power. Much of our creative energy is locked in the shadow. Integrating it releases tremendous creative potential. Artists, writers, musicians, and other creatives often find their best work comes when they access shadow content, when they stop trying to be perfect and allow their full humanity to express. Psychological freedom. The greatest reward is freedom. Freedom from compulsive behaviors, from unexplained moods, from self-sabotage, from projection. You become able to choose your responses rather than being driven by unconscious forces. This is what Jung called individuation, becoming who you truly are. Compassion for others. When you acknowledge your own shadow, you become more compassionate toward other shadows. You recognize that everyone is struggling with rejected parts of themselves. This compassion transforms relationships. It allows you to see others' darkness without judgment, because you've seen and accepted your own. Jung's final warning. Jung's warning about the shadow is both terrifying and hopeful. Terrifying because ignoring your shadow will destroy you. It's not a possibility. It's a certainty. The only question is how and when. But it's also hopeful, because shadow integration is possible. You can face your darkness, acknowledge it, understand it, and integrate it. When you do, you become whole, powerful, free. The shadow doesn't ask if you believe in it. It operates whether you acknowledge it or not. The only choice you have is whether you'll integrate it consciously or be destroyed by it unconsciously. You can put it simply, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your shadow is your fate. Unless you make it conscious, the question isn't whether you have a shadow. Everyone does. The question is whether you have the courage to face it, to acknowledge the parts of yourself you've tried to hide, to integrate what you've rejected. This courage determines whether your shadow becomes your enemy or your ally, whether it destroys you or makes you whole. The choice is yours, but the choice must be made, because the shadow won't wait forever, and ignorance won't protect you. Jung's warning is clear. Face your shadow, or it will face you, on its terms, at its chosen time, with consequences you won't be able to control. The path of shadow integration is difficult. It requires honesty, courage, and often support from others. But it's the only path to true wholeness, true freedom, and true psychological health. Your shadow is waiting in the darkness, growing stronger with every moment you ignore it. The only question is whether you'll meet it consciously, or whether it will ambush you when you least expect it. Choose wisely. Choose consciously. Choose integration. Your life depends on it.